This episode of the Topcast is proudly supported by Rock Out Loud.
When I give them something new, I say, okay, let's look at this before we start playing it. Let's look at it and see what it is in this piece that we recognize. What do you recognize in this piece? Do you recognize this rhythm as a whole? Do you recognize this note as a whole? Can you point out all of these things? We stop doing that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Topcast, your home for inspiration, ideas, business, and teaching strategies to help support your teaching and grow your studio. My name is Nicole Douglas, your host for the show, and if this is your first time here, thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to episode 242. Here's a special welcome to my top music pro teachers. Today's show notes and a full transcript are now available at topmusic.co/episode 242. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about dyslexia and how we can better reach our music students that struggle with that learning challenge. We talk about myths and misconceptions. We talk about the Orton Gillingham method of teaching reading. And also, Becki will share with us some recommended resources. So my guest today is Becki Laurent. She is the director of a music school in West Texas. Her superpowers include ADHD, listening, analyzing, and getting things done. She doesn't sleep much and can often be found on Facebook at all hours of the day and night in all the time zones of the world. So she gets so much done. We're excited to have her here with us today. She's been on our podcast before several years ago talking about Joy Tunes and Piano Maestro. But today we are going to delve into this world of dyslexia. Hey, Topcast listeners, this is Nicole Douglas, and I'm happy to be hosting the podcast today. And today my guest is Becki Laurent. And I have known Becki for several years. We met at a few music teacher conferences and just totally hit it off. She is just a breath of fresh air and so happy and bubbly, and I just love talking to her. And today she's going to be with us. We've heard her before a few years ago talking about Piano Maestro, and a lot of people know all about everything good she's done in that area. But today we're going to be talking about a different area that she has gained a lot of experience in, and it's all about teaching students with dyslexia, as well as we might end up throwing in a few things about ADHD and other situations that come up when we teach our music lessons. So Becki has been working for Joy Tunes for how many years now?
I think I just hit 8.
8 years. Wow. Yes. And you've done the conferences, touring and talking to lots of people. We've got your red glittery hat that you wear. But you also run a music studio in Texas and have how many teachers working for you now?
I have 5 teachers who work for me.
And I've just loved hearing about the different types of classes that you offer. I think they're really ingenious in how you pre-K kids and how they just funnel right into the program. And you just have an awesome setup going on there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So I wanted to have you share a little bit about your journey and how you got on this road to learning more about dyslexia. And I know it started because I heard that every year you pick one new thing to learn, which I think is an amazing goal to set. So how about you tell us a little bit about that and how you got on this journey?
Okay, so thank you for having me. First of all, it's been a while since I've been here, and it's nice to do this on U.S. time instead of my last interview was with Tim, and he was on Australian time, and I remember doing this at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And it was just, my husband was like, why are you going to work at 1 o'clock in the morning? You're a music teacher. And I was like, I've got a podcast with Tim, and it's Australian. Just don't worry about it. So it's kind of weird. So it's nice to be on American U.S. time. So that's kind of cool. And thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you, Nicole, because like you said, we've been friends forever and for always. And it's always a delight to visit with you.
Thank you.
And as you said, my journey started about 4 years ago when every year I select a research topic just for my own personal edification, because I love learning, and I like, going down the rabbit holes and finding all of the things out about all of the topics and reaching out to researchers and, asking questions about things. And about 4 years ago, I started working on the brain, like neurology and how people learn. because we're educators, that's kind of, that's kind of our bread and butter. So I thought it would be a good idea for me to learn what all the newest, ideas and concepts were that were out there. That kind of led me into learning really how, because all of these things are music related. So I don't pick a topic that doesn't have something to do with music, but I started learning about things like ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD, so it was kind of an important thing for me to learn about. And then from there, I started kind of delving into dyslexia because I have students who have dyslexia. I have students who have ADHD, as we all do. And I wondered if there was a way for me to figure out like a quicker path to imparting the information that I know about music into my students with dyslexia and ADHD. And so I started really delving into what is it that dyslexia is and isn't, and how do the people who have dyslexia learn. That to me was really, really intriguing. And ironically enough, I started that research about a year before I was offered a position as the music teacher for a school for dyslexic kids. It's a brand new charter school here in Texas, and I was not aware of this until I started working with them. But there's only a handful of schools that are charter schools that are dedicated to kids with dyslexia in them. Lubbock, Texas, which is where I live, happens to be one of those schools. And so I was really, really excited to be able to like apply everything that I had been studying for the last 2 or 3 years into a classroom setting. And it was super exciting. It's very, very exciting work to see how the things that I've learned and really kind of converted the traditional methodologies that people are using to teach dyslexic how to read into the music forum. And so that's where my focus has been the last 2 years, is transferring all of the things that I've learned about dyslexia into what I do every day. So I started this journey by seeking it because I went to all of these classes and workshops and things by all these amazing, this is how they were advertised. I'm a specialist in dyslexia and learning problems. And so I need you to come to my workshop. So I went to all of these workshops, and I remember sitting in one and looking at the man who was doing it and thinking to myself, do you know your audience at all? Are you sure you're talking about dyslexic people? Because I'm pretty sure that writing down a list for person with dyslexia is not going to help them. Yes. They're not good at reading. Mm-hmm. So how is giving them a written list and asking them to write out their progress helping? This seems like it's an exercise in frustration on everybody's part. Yours, theirs, everybody's going to be frustrated here. Yeah. So I just felt like there wasn't enough useful information, like good information out there for teachers who are desperate to reach, their kids. And I think that, right, and we're going to talk about this, I know, we're going to talk about how to recognize somebody who has dyslexia, whether they tell you they're dyslexic or not, because we are not diagnosticians. We are not doctors at all, by any stretch. I am not a doctor by any stretch, but I can recognize a learning problem with a student if I work with them for 30 minutes. I know what their problems are. I can see it with how they attempt to learn information. And so I threw everything out. And I went back to dyslexic people and therapists. And I asked the therapist, what is the best method for you to teach children who are diagnosed with dyslexia? What's the best method for them to use to learn to read words in their native language? And hands down, everybody came back and said, you have to learn how to do we use the Orton Gillingham method of teaching children to read. And it's an in-depth, very detailed study of how language fits together. And one of the things, and we're going to talk about this, one of the things that I learned was that dyslexic people and it's a common misconception, dyslexic people have a hard time reading, but they also have a really hard time hearing and listening. That was the part that I guess I just didn't realize as a teacher. I didn't realize that that was like a main component of dyslexia. So I paid for the training. I'm a certified OG reading teacher. I can teach people who have dyslexia how to read. That's not what I want to do. I mean, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to do that. I want to keep teaching music. So I took all of the training materials, not all of them, but as many of the training materials as I could, and I flipped it into the music world. And so all of the strategies that they use, I reworded, so to speak, so that I can apply them to my skills as a teacher, teaching music. So when I have a student who is diagnosed with dyslexia and the parents tell me straight out in their registration form, my child has dyslexia, I know better how to target the material that I'm trying to teach them. I know better how to do that. And I have very, very, I don't know, it's not precise, but I have a form that I use just to kind of keep me on track to make sure that I'm hitting all of the things that that student needs, a la OG training, to make sure that we're very consistent, that we're very methodical in the education of the child, so that they don't feel overwhelmed, and so that I'm not missing any steps, and so they're not missing any steps either. And they don't feel overwhelmed and frustrated and fall apart in my class. So that's kind of how I got into this whole field. And it's unbelievably rewarding, just on a personal level, to be able to reach these kids without that frustration. It is ridiculously freeing on me to know that I'm doing the very best that I can, and that the reaction of the children is not something that we can't work through. We can work through this, because I see on, all the Facebook pages and all the teacher groups where there are teachers who are just so frustrated with the student because it feels like they are starting over every single week. And I just want to shout at them, you guys need a new approach. We need a new approach, because it's not your teaching and it's not their learning. It's both of you together not communicating with each other. And if we flip that a little bit, you will be more compassionate, because you will understand where they're coming from and they will understand where you're coming from. And when you finally have a meeting of those two minds, you can move forward, because the child understands that you're doing everything you can to help them, and you understand where the child is, and you can move forward at that point. But until then, until you really understand what the core issue is as to the block of their learning, you can't move forward. You're just going to be frustrated, and you're going to want to, fob them off onto somebody else, which you should totally do. If you don't want to learn how to teach this particular child, please move them on to somebody else. I'm just going to say that. That's not a very popular, comment, but move them on to somebody else who will do that. Because the worst thing that I think teachers can do, and it's something that I know we all want to avoid, is damaging the psyche of a child. We want them to love music forever and for always, and we need to be part of that. So I'm very passionate about that part. And I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying that, but really and truly, do no harm. Really. It's great for doctors, but it's great for teachers to remember too. The words that we use can really, really damage children if we're not really, really super careful.
And it's not just our words too. One passion of mine lately has been, I'm not totally advocating for the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I think it provides a neat framework for helping us as teachers work through some strategies. And what I've discovered is it's in the child's interest, it's in my interest, if we can get their brain online as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, they need to feel like they have stability and safety and trust. And you can't do that if they feel scared or worried about how you're feeling about them. And so I used to think, if I take time to play this game with a student, then the parent might be mad that we're not learning about music or whatever, or it won't look like we're learning music. And when in fact, I can go back to them now that I know this and say, no, I'm turning their brain on. I'm putting them in a place where they can be more efficient at learning, because otherwise it's like paying money for a lesson that isn't going to actually stick. So,
Well, and I think that's a critical component for us as educators, and we are educators, even though we're a little bit outside the box educators.
yes.
We're not like a school teacher educator, but we are still educators. I think it's really, really important for you to have that conversation with parents. And it's a conversation that we have here at my studio with parents before they even start classes. You are going to see and hear things in our classes that don't sound or look like the traditional learning mode that you think is what's supposed to happen here. But trust me when I say your child is learning. It's not going to look traditional, but it is actually learning. And we don't do anything here that's not moving us toward the goal of getting that information in the child's head. And when the parents understand that, I think you can worry less about what it looks like to them, because the proof is going to be in the fact that their child loves learning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure.
So
Okay.
I totally agree with you.
Yes. All right. So we've heard where you came from. Now let's talk about common misconceptions. We were thinking of top 5 myths about teaching students with dyslexia. Take us away.
Okay, so you said, those of you that have never done a podcast, you always ask the interviewer if they can send you a list of things that you want to talk about, so you're not like going into it completely blind. And so when you asked me this question, I thought, wow, that's a really good question. How am I going to come up with 5 of them? Because the I don't know that there are 5 like myths or misconceptions, but I did kind of come up with 5 of them that I see a lot in just, the conversations that I have with teachers. So the first one that is typically, I say dyslexia, and most people think that it's a reading problem, like it's a traditional reading book problem. That it's, letters are flipped or they're backwards, or letters are, they're not finished. Like the letter, when the child sees the letter, that they don't see the whole letter. That is a misconception among dyslexics. That doesn't happen for everybody. There are, varying degrees. So that's one. The second one is that dyslexia is relevant to teaching music or piano learning. I hear that from teachers as well. Well, the child is dyslexic, but I'm not teaching them to read words, so it's not going to affect their piano education. Totally untrue, because dyslexia, as we're going to talk about, is not a vision problem, which is actually my third one. My third misconception is that dyslexia is a vision problem. It's not just a vision problem. There's some components to dyslexia that are vision related, but that's not the whole part of it that we are dealing with and that the child is living with, or the student is living with. So dyslexia is not necessarily a vision problem. I see a lot of teachers talk about, get the child in vision therapy with their eye doctor and that'll help fix their dyslexia. That's not it. It doesn't.
Yeah. We do it.
And then the fourth misconception or, thought is that dyslexia is rare. Dyslexia is not rare. It affects 1 in 5 people in this country. Wow. In the United States, it affects 1 in 5 people. So if you've got 20 students, the odds are pretty high that at least 4, almost a quarter of your student body is dyslexic. So you need to have some strategies in place to reach those kids. You really need to have some strategies in place for that. And then the fifth one is the misconception that you, as a teacher with all of the vast skill that you have, that you can reach those students with traditional methods of teaching. And that is not, it's not untrue, but it's also not, it shouldn't be your focus. Because while we have some amazing tools at our fingertips to teach and really help these dyslexic kids reprogram their brains, we do it in the wrong priority. we don't prioritize the things that their brains need to develop to get them where we want them to go. We put the learning process that we were taught, the traditional way that we were taught, we have it in the wrong order for dyslexic brains. And if you flip it, if you turn it around a little bit and you spend a little more time on some of the things that are not something that we normally do, it sounds vague, I'm just going to just say it. The dyslexic brain really, really needs a heavy, solid dose of rhythm before you ever look at a page of music. You guys need to spend a lot of time teaching them to listen and read and imitate and copy rhythms, whether you're clapping them or you're playing an iPad game with them. Rhythm needs to be the key component for teaching piano to kids with dyslexia. You have to start with teaching rhythm. There's no way around it. Rhythm is the key to getting these kids to read music and to understand how to listen. And the happy side benefit that I have found among all of my dyslexic students is that since I've changed our priorities in the class, not only has their music reading and understanding of how music is put together increased, but I'm hearing from their parents and their therapists that they are beginning to understand language better, and they're doing better in reading much quicker than they were before they started music lessons with us. Mm-hmm. And so that has just been such an incredibly powerful validation of everything that we've been working on. And I say my teachers and I have been working on for the last couple of years, that we've really been focused on changing that dynamic and really giving the priority of rhythm and listening a much higher,
emphasis
emphasis in the lesson. So yes, we still read music, but that's less of what we're doing right now with the students. And the benefits have just paid off in spades. It has just been an amazing, amazing turnaround for some of these kids.
Yes. And what's interesting is that we all know as teachers that rhythm is an important component of teaching music. But if that wasn't emphasized as we were taking lessons, what sometimes happens, I found, is that when I'm teaching a dyslexic or an ADHD or any kind of learning challenge that I feel unsure about what I'm doing in the moment, I kind of go into that fight or flight a little bit, because I'm like, oh no, I'm not sure what to do because what I'm doing right now isn't working. And if that happens, all of a sudden our teacher brain goes offline and we revert to what we were taught in the moment. And so sometimes I've had to go back to students or parents and say, you know what, can I have a redo? Because what I did last week is not what I meant to do. And so let's try that again. And so we have to let ourselves as teachers have grace too, because sometimes our brain goes offline in the middle of trying to figure out what's going on. And then like I said, we know that rhythm is important, but this is great to hear that it's showing up in benefits in language and with you're hearing it from therapists. That's amazing.
Yeah. The part about about dyslexia that I didn't know, because like many of you, I thought dyslexia was just a vision problem, and that it was just letters, being flipped or numbers being backwards, and, just seeing B's as D's and not seeing L's as L's, but maybe seeing them as I's or T's or whatever. What I didn't realize, and what the science shows, is that in people with dyslexia, the literacy area of their brain isn't real strong, and it isn't really well connected. And the key to connecting all of that is in the ears. What dyslexics have a really hard time with is matching what they see with how they hear. And that's why rhythm is so, so important to begin with a person who has dyslexia. You start with rhythm, you end with rhythm, you teach them that these abstract little dots have meaning. And because it's just the simplest form of music, because it's just, a very limited number of symbols for them to learn, it's very easy for them to begin to build that distinction visually of how are these notes different and how do they sound differently? And this builds that part of their brain that allows them to see and hear and then react quickly, because that's the problem that they're having in reading, is that they see something and they're forced to blurt something out to make that sound, phonetically, and they don't really have time to think about it. And there's so many sounds in the English language. The OG method very methodically goes through all of the different sounds in language, and it goes through what they look like, and they drill and drill and drill and drill and drill and drill and drill. And as teachers, as music teachers, we don't spend enough time drilling rhythm, just plain rhythm, with any of our students, let alone with our dyslexic ones, because we want them to, play the sound, or we want them to, if you want them to learn to play by rote or by ear, that you want them to be listening to what you're playing and then being able to copy that back. These are people who they don't have that circular, they don't have that circle ready yet. There's still gaping holes in that circle of learning there, where they see something, they hear something, and they react. That's not happening for them yet. And so we spend in our classes, especially with our dyslexics, we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the class working through rhythms that I know, it does require a little more preparation on your time. You're not going to be able, on your part, you're not going to be able to just sit down in the class and say, okay, today we're going to learn this song. You have to prepare ahead of time. I'm going to teach this piece today. And before I teach this piece, I'm going to need to spend 3 weeks working on rhythm, so that when I show them the music, they can see the rhythm in the song that we've been working on, and it feels comfortable to them and they recognize it now. And then I can show them how it goes up and down on the staff, and then I can show them how it goes up and down on the keyboard. It's a longer process, but it's, as long as you're very thorough with it, your dyslexic students are going to improve, and eventually that learning curve will get shorter and shorter and shorter. Probably won't ever be what you're used to with your neurotypical students who don't have dyslexia. It's probably not going to be a week, but it won't be 6 months. And I know from the groups, it feels like every week I'm starting over. You are. Every single week you are starting over. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. Every week you are starting over, because these kids have they are struggling so hard to just survive life, that a lot of what you say is going to go in one ear and out the other. By the time they walk out the door, you are going to have to repeat yourself a lot. You're just going to have to repeat yourself a lot. And, that's okay. As long as you don't take that personal and you don't foist your frustration out on the child and look at them and go, oh my God, why are you not getting this? That they will see that in your eyes. So don't do that. But as long as you understand that they're not doing it on purpose, they're not on purpose trying not to learn this. It is a struggle. That part of their brain, the literacy part of their brain, is just not that well developed. And when you look at them from that perspective, I think it gives you a little more patience and a lot more grace for them.
Definitely. One framework or analogy that made a lot of sense to me when I was studying about the brain and how it all works is to think about it like, this comes from Norman Doidge's book, The Brain That Changes Itself, is to imagine that you're rewiring the brain by going to the top of a hill that's snowy, and you're going to go sled down it. And the very first time you sled, you're creating a neural pathway in the brain, and it's fresh and it's new and you don't know where it's going to go. And then if you walk back up to the hill and you go down again, you're more likely to go down the path that you already went. And the more times you sled, the deeper that path gets. So you want to make sure that path is the right path. And oftentimes I can imagine, I know this from experience, that students come into our studios with neural pathways that are in the wrong place. They weren't given the opportunities to wire their brain in a way that's such that they're listening to music in the way that we need them to. And so more and more, we're now having to go back and retrain their brain how to do these things. And so that's exactly what you're saying, is that we have to be patient, because the repetition is making those pathways stronger. And I do find that there's like a hump, like as we stick with the repetition and don't like my fault is that I think it's getting boring. And so I stop doing the repetition.
Right.
To them, it's what they need.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so if we just keep sticking with it, then we get over that hump. And sometimes they can actually be like stronger musicians because I'm not doing that repetition as much with my regular students, and I probably should be.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing I have discovered over the last at least the last year, especially with this whole online teaching thing, that the more I teach as if everyone is dyslexic, the stronger my students become. Because the whole Orton Gillingham methodology it's a multi-sensory learning experience, and so it's not enough for you to show it to them on a piece of paper. They have to do it. They have to touch it. They have to experience it. They have to feel it in their face. They have to see it with their eyes. They have to touch it with their fingers. Music is unique in a learning environment in that we have to play it, so we're already engaging in multisensory education. By and large, we're already doing that, but adding a little bit more to it to make the experience a little more meaningful, I think really helps all learners, not just the dyslexic ones. Everybody gets better if you spend a little more time in rhythm and you spend a little more time in teaching them to listen, to really hear. I had a conversation with my daughter the other day because she's having to learn another language. We already speak a lot of languages at my house. My husband is a French national, so my children have had to grow up learning to speak French so that they can speak to their dad's side of the family. We live in Texas, and my first language was English, but both of my parents are bilingual in Spanish. And so I learned Spanish growing up. So my kids also learned Spanish growing up. They went to a school, elementary school that had Spanish classes from kindergarten all the way through to fifth grade. So a lot of languages going on in my house anyway. And I was talking to my daughter and we were talking about, something about listening. And she said, yeah, it's so funny to me that people, when we're listening to somebody speak or we're listening to music or whatever, she said, I hear things differently than they do. And I said, well, yeah, because you are the product of a musician. And in our home, not only has your brain evolved to learn to distinguish between language sounds, but you spend the rest of your time learning to distinguish sounds in music, whether it's orchestral music or piano music or guitar music or band music or whatever. Your brain has evolved to learn to really hear the differences between, the different sounds and the different textures and the different, volumes of all of those things. I said, that is a huge, huge benefit to you in every aspect of your education, not just your musical one. And I think when we explain to kids that that's the goal here, that we're not just teaching them music because mom said so, but when you tell children this learning experience is to build your brain. Okay. This is what we're doing. We are creating those neural pathways. You can even use that language with a 5-year-old and they will understand it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They will totally understand you saying we are building your brain. Okay. So it's going to hurt a little bit. It might be a little bit hard. It might be a little bit stressful, but we're building your brain. And I promise you, this will get easier. I think the more you tell kids what you're doing and why you're doing it, the better their buy-in and the more likely you are to get them to work with you in that learning process.
And the less anxiety they feel over
it
and turns their brain on. If they're not anxious, they're ready. They're more ready.
They're ready to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Are virtual lessons with Zoom driving you mad? Audio issues? Trouble connecting? RockOutLoud.live is a virtual music lesson video platform made for music teachers who want to provide their students with the ultimate virtual music lesson experience. Inside the RockOutLoud.live video application, you'll have access to resources like sheet music searches of a library of songs along with chords you can share across screens to your students in real time. Plus, your student can download their virtual lesson notes while inside the virtual session. It's cheaper than Zoom and gives you lots of the tools to teach an interactive lesson. I've personally been testing rockoutloud.live with my students and also asking other teachers I know to try it out, and the feedback has been phenomenal. The ease at which you can connect with your students, the sound quality, and also the ability to share on-screen chord charts, chord symbols, and lead sheets is just phenomenal. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for a free 7-day trial by visiting rockoutloud.live now.
Okay, so I have a little bit of experience with Orton Gillingham. When I homeschooled one of my children, I stumbled upon a reading and spelling curriculum that was based on that. And everybody touted it as the best one out there when I did all my research, and I was so excited to try it, and my kids loved it. But it's been a little while since I've done it. So can you remind me, what are the basic tenets of Orton Gillingham? And then let's see how we can apply it to music.
Okay, so the Orton Gillingham teaching method has, I think there's 10 components to this. Okay, so I'm just going to go through them really, really quickly because this is actually the Orton Gillingham method of teaching reading. This is not music based. This is teaching children to read their native language. So the first thing that all of the teachers are taught is that it has to be multisensory. Then the second one is that you have to teach phonetic alphabetic sequentially. The third one is that you have to teach synthetic and analytic. So that is teaching phonics in the smallest units of sound and matching that with its written symbol. Okay, so
Wow.
Teaching the sound and then learning what that symbol looks like. Okay, the fourth one is analytic phonics, which is looking at the whole word and then breaking it down into its parts, not just phonetically, but going back into like where it comes from originally, where what the Latin part of it is, that kind of thing. So you have to really, really break it down and really, really decode it. And then the fifth part of our training is that you have a very structured presentation. Okay, so you provide the child with the same presentation every single time you are teaching something new. And before you teach the next step, you make sure to review the stuff they already know. So you're building on what they already know. In our field, we usually call that scaffolding, where you teach something that they already know, and then you just add a little bit more to it. Again, I love Samantha Coates's material for this because she has this brilliant rote library where you present the child with the first level of the song, and then the next level of the song, the written music, after they learn how to play it by ear. You show them the second one and you say, can you spot the differences here? And they find the differences in the sound. This is exactly what the dyslexic brain needs to see and do in order to move forward. The sixth thing is that it has to be super repetitive. I mean, ridiculously repetitive all the time, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of repetition, because that's what really builds that fluency. And that's what you were talking about earlier with the sliding down the sled and building that groove into the snow,
Programming their brain
so that that it becomes automatic. That automaticity is really what we're aiming for as teachers. And then the seventh thing we talk about a lot is the cumulative, where they learn that they have mastered this set of skills and you are adding to it. So we're really building their basket of education. And then the eighth one is cognitive, where the student understands and can repeat back what they're learning, not how to do it, but why am I doing this, and being able to verbalize, this is what I have learned, and this is why it's important. That cognitive understanding is super duper important as it relates to OG. It's understanding the language that they are speaking from its very, very fundamental beginnings. And then the ninth thing is, these are the last two, are all about the teacher part. This is not the student learning part, but this teacher part. So the ninth one is diagnostic, not in the sense that we are doctors, but that you diagnose what you taught in that class and what worked and what didn't work. And then also what concepts you covered during that class, okay? Because that's really, really important for the 10th step, which is prescriptive, which is so you, in step 9, you're looking at what you taught, how you taught it, and what was successful and what wasn't. But 10 is what are you going to do next week? So you can't leave the lesson with this is what I taught and this is how it worked and this was great and this didn't work and the student forgot this and we had to review this. But you have to go one step further and determine, okay, so based on my knowledge of this student and what happened in this last class, this is what I know I'm going to have to review next week. This is how I'm going to approach the things that I saw that were, things that we need to work on. You begin planning your next session during your last session so that you have a really solid understanding of how to push the student forward. So that those last 2 steps, the diagnosing the class and then the prescribing what you're going to do next, I think are the 2 that have been the biggest changes for me. Because usually, I write down what the students are doing and then I close that notebook and we move on to the next student. And I don't really think about what didn't go well, what I felt like I failed at as a teacher and that I need to fix. Because you know when you're teaching, oh my gosh, they did not get that and I did not explain it very well. And I'm going to have to revisit this next week because I did not explain it very well. But if you don't write that down, you're going to forget by next week because you'll have slept. So you'll forget what you know you didn't do last week and in the next week, and then you'll be like, oh, dang, I probably should have prepared a little better for this.
So a whole session on just how to do those last 2 steps, because actually all of our students would benefit from being able to have us really thinking through our lesson plans and what worked and what didn't.
So those are the 10, that's the Orton Gillingham method for teaching reading. And, as I go through them, I look at how am I going to redirect this into the musical field, into teaching music. And it really does kind of lend itself, music does very easily to just fall right into the Orton Gillingham method of teaching reading musically. Just really smoothly flows right into that because we are multisensory, because we have to break down measures sometimes into their smallest little parts. And we have to break down the measure into right hand, left hand, and then together. We have to break down, do you make sound with visually? You have to break down. Are we making sounds? Are we not making sounds? Which hand is playing? Which hand is quiet? All of that information is in a single measure of music. And that's a lot of information, and most people have, the brain is wired to accept that much information, prioritize it, and then execute on it. Whereas the dyslexic brain has a little more trouble breaking it down into pieces and putting it back together again internally before it ever shows up in their fingers or on an instrument. Mm-hmm. So this methodology really, really does just kind of easily lend itself to being able to present material musically very effectively and very efficiently with the students, albeit with a lot of repetition.
Yes. Okay, so how do we do that?
Okay, well, that's a really good question, but it's really, really specific to a particular situation.
Yes. So then, each student is individual, right? So yes, it's hard to say that, but that's the answers we want. We want to be able to show up and say, okay, I know how to teach all my dyslexic students now because I know these principles, but it doesn't work that way.
Well, it does and it doesn't. I think, this is a podcast and we're not going to be able to get through, a whole lot of specific.
I know, I was putting you on the spot for just a minute.
Specific strategies. So, for example, and this is assume that this is a student that I have had for a while. And I didn't realize the child was dyslexic until, 4 lessons in. And now I am teaching out of, I don't know, the Faber, what is that purple book, the primer. And I am trying to get them to understand, intervals. We're not ready for intervals. So at this point, I'm looking at that music and I'm going, oh, we're doing C, F, and G in 2 different hands. And these are all half notes. So I'm going to look at that and I'm going to close the book and I'm going to tell a student, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to play this song, but first, okay, I don't want you to look at it. I want you to put your hands down on the piano fall board. We're going to put the fall board down. I want you to put your hands on here, and I want you to lift your pinky in your left hand. All right. Now, you may have to literally write an L on their left hand, or you can color code their hands and say, okay, so we're going to do the purple hand pinky, the purple hand thumb. Then we're going to do your right hand, which is orange, because you don't want the colors to be too similar. So contrasting colors, orange thumb and orange pinky. And we're going to do this many, many times. Okay. Pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky, pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky, pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky, pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky. Then we're going to do it backwards. So we're going to start with the orange hand. We're going to do pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky, pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky, but going down. So I'm teaching up, I'm teaching down, then I'm going to add rhythm to it. So I'm going to put a little rhythm card in front that is not the rhythm that's in the actual book yet. Okay. Because I want them to start scaffolding that information. So I'm going to put a little card that has, 4 quarter notes on it, and we'll do pinky, thumb, thumb, pinky with the drum machine on my clavinova playing so that they start to feel how rhythm really kind of moves through even something as simple as just doing finger exercises. And then I will gradually progress through what it is that I want them to learn for the song. So when we finally look at the music, and we're looking at it, and I say, okay, so this note here that I will be pointing at is in your left hand because this is the bass clef. So I might change the color on their hand that was purple to a purple bass clef so they know exactly where it is. And say, okay, so that's your pinky. We're going to put that on F. Here's your F down here. F, we're going to play pinky. And then this next one is middle C, which you recognize because it's very distinctive. So you're going to use your thumb on that one. And we'll go through this process very, very slowly. But not so much that they feel like I'm talking down to them, more that I'm just explaining it very, very in depth so that they understand what it is that I'm asking them to do. And they can begin to see how rhythm, I think in that first one, though, it's like all half notes. I want to say it's like mostly half notes. So we'll talk about it. Okay, so you're going to say 1, 2. Note to everybody here, when I am teaching, I do not use the method of 1, 2, 3, 4 through the measure in a 4/4 measure. I treat each of the notes as we start over. So if there are 2 half notes in a measure, I will have them say 1, 2, 1, 2 through the measure. Not 1, 2, and then 3, 4, because that adds an extra layer that even my brain doesn't want to do.
For a lot of kids.
I don't want to do that either. I mean, as an adult, I don't do that. I always start over. So I don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't do that. I try to keep it very small numbers so that I can start over as quickly as possible.
And it's about chunking the information, right? So
it is. It's totally about chunking information, and that's for a neurotypical. For a person with dyslexia, you really want to break it down to its smallest possible pieces so that they don't have a lot of things to try to force into that teeny tiny little space. So that's kind of how I would approach any new piece of music, regardless of what it is. If I have a student, more advanced student who I know is dyslexic, and I know that the measure coming up is going to be really problematic, You better believe I am breaking out the hand exercises. We're going to do it in our fingers first before we apply sound to it. We're going to do it in our fingers first. Then we're going to look at it and match what our fingers are doing with what our eyes are seeing on the page, whether it's going up or down. And then I'll take them to the piano and have them play it on the piano, where they'll actually be rewarded with, oh, this is what it sounds like. So I think when you really break down what it is that you're teaching into its teeny tiniest spots, you are going to be building those blocks of information that they will then be able to use in, sight reading a new piece. And that is something that we talk about a lot in our classes. When I give them something new, I say, okay, let's look at this before we start playing it. Let's look at it and see what it is in this piece that we recognize. What do you recognize in this piece? Do you recognize this rhythm as a whole? Do you recognize this note as a whole? Can you point out all of these things? We stop doing that with students after they progress to a certain level. With dyslexic kids, you can never stop doing that. But even with your neurotypical kid, you shouldn't stop doing that. You should make them analyze the score with you. What do you recognize? What do you not recognize? What is it, just glancing at it, that you think you and I need to talk about before you try to sight read this piece? I think that approach, as I said earlier, that approach has really changed how I teach, so that I am being more deliberate and more consistent across all of my students, building better musicians, because I'm taking the time to really break things down first and then put it together into something that they can hear and recognize and feel very confident playing right from the beginning.
Yes. And I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here and think about, what are people going to be thinking as they're listening to us talk about all these very tiny, small concepts we're talking about. And for some of us, it might feel like we're starting to get out of the fun zone, that trying to drill down and do these tiny little things and talk about all this drilling and repetition to adults might sound like we're taking some of the fun out of learning. So, which is not actually true, because I know you and I know you have lots of fun. So can you share with us maybe one or two things that you do to make this process fun for these?
Okay, so I know, I guess maybe it does. Until you said that, it never even occurred to me that drill work was going to be tedious. But
because when we were in elementary school growing up, they would drill.
You're right. I mean,
do it in not a fun way.
Pill and drill and math was the thing. That, I mean, I remember going home with 100 addition problems for homework, or 100 multiplication problems for homework, and having to do all of that. And you're right, that was tedious and boring. And this, I guess, could sound tedious and boring. I don't think that it is, in the sense that you have probably more than any teacher in the history of ever access to amazing resources, not discounting your own creativity. If you know that you are going to be teaching rhythm and you need, different ways to do that, you have endless resources to do that. There are blocks that you can make. There are blocks that you can buy. There are games for rhythm that you can pull up. You can make dice that have, you can write on the dice here, get blank dice and write the rhythm on there and throw them out and have the kids, create their own rhythm patterns from the 4 dice and how they land on the floor. I mean, there are 1,001 different ways for you to creatively think up ways to get this information into the children's heads without it just being a flashcard that says, 4 quarter notes on it. And we're going to do it with these fingers. I love, 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 love. This is one of the favorite things that the students get here is light up gloves. We have the light up gloves that, you are supposed to wear at Halloween or for rave parties or whatever. I love using those with my students because there are colors on the fingertips, and we can make fun finger patterns with lights and turn the lights off in studio, and they can see their little fingers, dancing all over the place. I mean, there are lots and lots and lots of ways for you to make drilling work fun. I'm obviously, I work for Joy Tunes, so I love technology and using technology and all of the 975 gazillion games that there are for rhythm and note drilling and flashcarding and all of that. I love using all of those. And it doesn't need to take, you don't need to spend 20 minutes drilling. You need to spend 3 or 4 minutes drilling, and then move on to something else, because that's the other thing that dyslexic people need is they need that structure. It needs to be consistent. You have to do the same things every single class, but within that framework, it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing every single week. You can do, in my classes, it's usually rhythm notation, game. Okay. So I'm covering all of those things, at least twice in a 30-minute class. And then we'll play a game at the end. And, sometimes I let them pick the game. Mostly I don't. Mostly I pick the game because it relates to the rest of the material. So, I don't know that anybody who's out there is thinking to themselves, oh my God, this sounds so tedious and so boring. No.
Or
because
you're not tedious or boring, just like overwhelming. Like, how do I make it? Yeah.
No, I think that you're creative enough. If you're a teacher, you're creative enough to make that fun. And always remember that if you're not having fun, they probably aren't either.
Yes.
So
that was one thing I was going to say is I can imagine that you probably throw all kinds of party noises and cheers when you see the brain starting to work in a child. And like, even if they're only playing those 3 notes, F, C, and G, like, let's celebrate. Like, oh my gosh, your brain just connected that. That's amazing.
Yes. And when kids hear you, the adult authority, say that, oh my God, you did it.
Yes.
You totally did this. Your brain just lit up. Like I could almost see like sparks come out of your head. That was amazing. Can you do it again? Let's do it again, because that was amazing. Do you want me to play with you? Do you want me to change the sound? We can change the sound and do it again. Can you maybe play it softer? What happens if you play it softer? Or, what if I really let you like bang it out, man? Just like you're really mad at your little sister and this is the only way you can say you're mad. And so bang it. We're your teachers. We know how to teach.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we know how to teach. We just need to change the direction of our teaching a little bit and reprioritize, I think, our focus.
Oh, wow. Great ideas. And it's been great to drill down into these smallest parts of learning to read music and learning to internalize music, because some of this happened for us before we could even think about what was happening. And so we don't know how to break that down in our teaching, because, if we learned it before we could articulate what we were learning, it's hard to be in control of what's happening in the teaching process. So frameworks like the Orton Gillingham help us think about all these tiny things that help us celebrate these small moments as we see them come up with our students. So this is
I think that's the thing that has been most astounding to me as I've gone through this journey for the last, several years, has been a revisiting of all of those emotions and feelings that I had when I was a kid and I was learning to learn. I think we forget what that's like. And so in addition to, continuing to learn something and study, like really study something every year, I have made it a priority in my own personal life to put myself in learning situations where I have to be the student and I have to learn something new. And I have to go through that process of interpreting what a teacher has said to me or a coach has said to me. I started swimming. Lord have mercy. Those people who swim, they are to be worshiped as gods of all things. They are incredible people, because what they are doing is not easy. And anybody who tells you different is lying to you, because wow, there is a lot of thinking that goes on in swimming. I had no idea that there was all this stuff going on in swimming. And so that's what I've spent, the last few months learning how to do. I've really learned how to swim. And, that learning process it's humbling, because you are no longer in the driver's seat and you have to listen and submit to somebody else's articulation of information. And as a teacher, it's so so easy to look at your coach. I know I have had to check myself several times and say, are you even speaking English? Do you not see the confused look on my face? Because I'm not understanding anything that you are saying. Can you try again? Not everybody is capable of hearing those words. And so I have had to learn how to use my words to say to someone else, hey, I didn't quite understand what you meant. Can we maybe try a different way of either saying it, or maybe could you demonstrate it for me so that I can better see what it is that you want me to do? And I'm a grown-up. I'm a grown-up who can use my words.
Yes.
We are dealing with children who are taught, you don't question grown-ups. You don't tell grown-ups, I didn't get that. I don't understand. Our kids are just not permitted to do that sort of thing. And I think it's important for us to know what that feels like so that we can give them permission to approach us and say, I'm sorry, Miss Becki. I know that you said that, but I didn't get it. Can we try it again?
Opening that's been really helpful with my autistic student that I have and others, to just be able to feel like they can say, I'm sorry, I lost focus. Can we have a redo?
Yes.
And I say that to my students too. Like, I'm so sorry. I got thinking about your next piece and I wasn't listening to what you just said. Will you please tell me again?
Or play that again, because you know what? I missed it. I started thinking about how we were going to fix something and I didn't hear that part. So
I was focused on the rhythm and I forgot about that one part you said you needed help with. Yeah.
and I think the more that you learn to communicate with your students and give them permission to treat you like, a person who is there to help them, so they can ask, they have the freedom to ask those questions safely without, getting criticized or, rolling your eyes or whatever, which they often get, from people who they ask for help. I know that when my children ask me for help, sometimes I'm like, okay, seriously, I'm in the middle of something and I'm rolling my eyes at them. And I'm like, seriously, Becki, stop it. Just stop it. Because that doesn't make them feel safe, and it doesn't make them feel confident enough to come to me for other things that might be really important, So I think the more that we learn to engage and communicate with our students in a very open and loving way, the better our teaching, just overall becomes.
Yes. And the better the experience for the student. Yes. And hopefully it will help them go on to be lifelong music learners.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Becki. This has been amazing, thinking about drilling down our teaching into these smallest components and then how to help not just dyslexic. I think this episode is going to teach us a lot about ways that we can work with all kinds of students and help them just build those neural pathways that they need to be successful in their music journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been really, really fun to share all of this with you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
This episode is over, but if you heard about anything during this episode that you didn't have a chance to write down, don't worry. We list everything you've heard about in this episode in the show notes, or head to topmusic.co. I'm Nicole Douglas, and you've been listening to the Topcast. See you next time.
For more information about this episode and to find out how to enhance your own teaching, visit topmusic.co. You'll find everything you need for your studio, from lesson plans to cheat sheets, quick win teaching ideas, and guides on how to build your teaching business. Plus, you'll be connected to a global community of the world's top music teachers. And when you're ready, join hundreds of other teachers around the world by becoming a Top Music Pro member and get access to all our bonus content and flagship courses. And don't forget to follow topmusic.co on social media and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. That's all for today. We'll see you in the studio.